Well, hello. Russell Goodman here, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and welcome to our presentation today. We call it Integrating E-commerce Transportation to Achieve Execution Excellence. You know, I don't have to tell you that there was a time, perhaps not that long ago for some of us, when e-commerce was just a side project. Retail was in-store only. If there were online sales, they were a minor thing. Not anymore. Today, e-commerce is the main stimulus for growth across retail, wholesale, and manufacturing alike. Just look at these stats. Last year, e-commerce retail sales in the U.S. grew at nearly 15%, about 10 times the 1.5% growth rate for retail overall. Here's what's key. If shippers are to gain maximum benefit, the opportunity e-commerce provides must integrate e-commerce fulfillment with their transportation management capabilities. Today's webinar intends to help you do that very thing. You'll learn how e-commerce is driving increasing complexity in logistics. You'll hear how to build an integrated approach that enables omni-fulfillment, increasing customer service while controlling costs. And you'll see how other customers, such as Incipio, are supporting their growth with multi-mode transportation solutions. Hey, changes to shipping are continuously, changing, with shippers needing to accommodate home delivery, drop shipments, and international customers. Opportunities abound, but transportation has to have an integrated strategy, or the additional revenue growth will be offset by higher costs. Well, that's precisely what today's presentation will help you avoid. Here's who you're going to hear from today. Brian Hodgson, Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Descartes. Brian provides strategy and sales execution for Descartes Transportation Management Solutions. Worked with hundreds of customers to help improve their supply chains, resulting in measurable cost savings, operational improvements, and increased customer service. Brian brings more than 20 years of experience. Prior to Descartes, he helped customers of Oz Development, Kiwa, 11 Technology, and Supply Work. We'll also hear from Bill Macbeth, Chief Research Officer, Chainlink Research. Bill is also a co-founder of Chainlink, a leading analyst firm in supply chain and Internet of Things. Bill leads Chainlink's research team, having personally conducted more than 50 primary research projects in retail, omnichannel challenges and strategies, logistics, RFID and IoT, sourcing and procurement, and other supply chain disciplines. All right. Question and answer session will follow the presentation today. You can get our speakers to drill further down into areas that interest you. You do that by filling in your question in the purple box at the bottom of your screen. Brian and Bill will answer as many of your questions as they can at the conclusion of the webcast. If we run out of time, however, they will address your questions offline. So follow the directions on your screen, please, to send in your questions. Now to our program. You'll hear first from Bill Macbeth of Chainlink Research. Bill, welcome.
Thanks so much, Russell. And I think this is a very important topic. Russell more or less covered our agenda in his intro. We're going to talk first about how e-commerce is driving growth and how that's creating these challenges for manufacturers, retailers, and wholesalers in ever-increasing diversity and complexity, as well as how do you fulfill profitably given the pressures, especially from folks like Amazon and so forth. Then we're going to give an answer of what some folks are doing, which is building this integrated approach to transportation, where they consider all of these together in their network design, integration of all the modes, and continuous optimization and fulfillment automation. And so let's get started. I think the first slide here is really just a recap of what you just heard about this continual growth. This is a chart of the growth over the last 10 years of e-commerce as a percent of retail across the economy, growing from 2.5% in 2006 to over 7.5% last year. And there's no end in sight for this. It's going to keep going and going. And as Russell pointed out, this is the engine of growth. 2/3 of all retail growth last year came from e-commerce sales. And so that means if you're not doing well in e-commerce, you're not seeing growth.
And Bill, I'd just add to that in terms of the growth, not just for retailers, but manufacturers, distributors. I mean, as we'll see today, there's a lot of new models that are creating, innovations that are creating growth opportunities, with e-commerce being the heart of that process flow.
That's a really great point, because omnichannel now applies across up and down the supply chain. We see more and more manufacturers and wholesalers all having online presences, and that portion of their business growing in importance in equally dramatic ways. One of the things is this explosion of delivery modes, and it seems like every week you hear about something new. So kind of going clockwise on this diagram here, besides the traditional parcel, you've got lockers in stores and in-store pickup. That big orange machine is something Walmart is testing out in one of their stores, sort of like a big vending machine when you come in to pick up your online order in the store. In the lower right, there's actually been several pilots and trials of delivery to the trunk of your car. The delivery driver gets a one-time key to your car, so while you're at work or someplace you're going to be for a while, that just shows up magically in your car. And they're turning that into a real service, a couple different folks. Of course, the delivery of groceries to your home, there's a bunch of services that have sprung up for that. Uber and others are getting into the game, not just with their drivers, but with this Uber rush on bicycles. We've got drones, private fleets, and in the center I was making the point that not all deliveries are the same. If you've got these big building materials, you're going to need special equipment. And it seems like every month you turn around, there's something new that comes in terms of how people expect to be delivered to. And this just adds complexity to the transportation manager's job of what's the best way to get goods to my customer. Now, in addition to that, there's other dimensions of complexity that e-commerce brings. It opens up international for many folks for which international was not previously possible. And that has its own set of complexities. Once you ship over borders, you're going to have multiple parties touching that. You've got all the documentations and the declarations, and if you get those wrong, then things get delayed and customers aren't happy, and potentially you get fined as well. Drop ship is another phenomena that we've seen increasing in popularity. Retailers love it because now they don't have to stock all of this merchandise to get their endless shelves. They can just ask their manufacturers to ship direct to their customers. In a sense, that shifts the inventory burden from from the retailer, who no longer has to hold it, to the manufacturer, who is holding that inventory in anticipation of orders. It also adds some complexity. If you're a manufacturer and you're used to just shipping big shipments to your retail customers, you now have to deal with these mixed mode logistics of partial plus the big shipments, potentially all in one facility. And each retailer, of course, has their own separate requirements, so you got to deal with those complexities as well. And now the picture becomes, especially for retailers who look to their stores and say, okay, I'm getting killed by Amazon, I'm going to fight back by using my stores as mini warehouses and fulfill from store. You've now got so many different potential fulfillment locations, your stores, your DCs, your partners, the drop ship, the wholesaler. So the decisions around where to fulfill from and where to stock things just become more complex. And last but not least is, and certainly in some markets, there's a huge variety of handling requirements for your various products, which would require special equipment in each of those cases. So these are all these dimensions of complexity that e-commerce is adding on. Now, the other part of the big challenge is how do you do this without losing your shirt? So Amazon, their net shipping costs this year are estimated to be $7 billion. So what does that mean, in case you're not familiar with that term? They charge their customers a certain amount for shipping, and that includes their prime fees in that number. But the actual cost of shipping is more than that. So they're subsidizing shipping costs to the tune of $7 billion. Now that is a big number by any standard. That is something like 6% of their revenue this year. And their profit went up quite a bit this year, so it's maybe 2 or 3 times their profit this year, but something like 10 times their profit in previous years. So Amazon is essentially buying market share. They're giving up a huge amount of profit and subsidizing shipping, and competitors have to respond, but they don't necessarily have the same option of just subsidizing the shipment costs in the same way. So that puts a huge downward pressure on how you're going to do this profitably and and lower your costs, your transportation costs and your fulfillment costs. Now, part of the answer, so e-commerce adds this layer of complexity of where should I be stocking my products? What should be in the DC? Which DC should it be in, or which store should it be in, so that I can have the lowest possible cost of fulfillment? And that means understanding and accurately forecasting your demand, not just your total demand, but where is it coming from? Which stores or who's buying from e-commerce, and even which regions and which zones of the country those e-commerce orders should be fulfilled from. There's also this strategy of, hey, I'm going to use my store as a bunch of mini warehouses. Store fulfillment is not easy, and the store is not set up to be optimized for pick, pack, ship. It's set up for shopping. And so how can you control those store fulfillment costs is another dimension of the profitable fulfillment challenge. Distributed order management, I'll talk more about that in a second, but you really need to have real-time visibility in that. And the last but not least is returns. We do know that online orders get returned at a rate that's on average something like 3 or 4 times that of in-store purchases. And it makes perfect sense. When you're in the store, you try it on, you touch it and feel it, and you decide right there which ones you want. When you're online, you buy a bunch of them, and then you return the ones you don't want. So how to deal with that? There are a bunch of mechanisms for it, but one of them is to incentivize people to return in the store, because it's going to be cheaper than having to pay for the reverse shipping. But just probably as important, or perhaps more important, is when they come back in the store, they're likely to buy something. So there's a benefit for the retailer there. And if time allows, we've got other things you can do to deal with returns as well. So given all of those challenges, the approach that we're recommending here, that we see successful retailers and manufacturing to do, is to build a more integrated approach to transportation and what we call omni-mode integration. That starts with what's your network look like and what's your mix of carriers look like. So e-commerce has a big impact potentially on your optimal network, distribution network design. You made decisions in pre-e-commerce days based on a set of assumptions which are now changing. Demand patterns are changing. So there are decisions like, should you fulfill entirely your e-commerce out of a dedicated e-commerce DC, or should you use the same DC for both bulk mode shipments and e-commerce and have a mixed mode DC? Should you fulfill e-commerce orders in-house or by a third party? Where should those e-commerce DCs be if they're going to be dedicated? Maybe you co-locate them near one of the parcel carrier or ground carrier's hubs, or some of them even offer the service that you can use their space and put inventory in or near their space in their hubs. And the impact of store fulfillment strategy. So if you are going to fulfill from stores and use them as mini warehouses, that could impact the distribution of goods across your network and how many DCs you need. Maybe you don't need as many DCs for e-commerce if you're going to fulfill largely out of the stores. The last point here is we're going to talk about a bunch of transportation strategies that can impact your cost of transportation and where is the optimal place to put things. So those might also have an impact on your network strategy. The other thing that gets impacted is your mix of carriers. And this is not just about more business to parcel, although that's certainly a big part of it, because some of these strategies talk about the zone skipping and pool distribution involve using non-parcel legs, either part of the way or all of the way, for e-commerce shipments. And so now you've got to make sure that your service contracts and your service agreements reflect the things you're looking for, the type of guaranteed delivery that's expected in e-commerce, the type of really granular tracking across these multiple legs so that people know exactly where the package is. And you want to make sure that TMS supports this broader mix, including parcel, but also including regional carriers and specialty carriers, which will become increasingly important in this new world. So Brian's going to talk to you a little bit about one case study that highlights some of these.
Thank you very much, Bill. So I'm going to talk about a few, throughout this presentation, manufacturers, distributors, retailers as well that are leveraging technology to really take advantage of the omni-channel and the e-commerce opportunity. And first is Incipio, a customer that we've been working with a number of years, and they make the cases for mobile devices, iPhones and tablets and those sort of things. And they've just experienced really tremendous growth. I'd say they sort of were born and sort of grew up really in sort of this omni-channel world. They sell online to consumers as well as to smaller sort of wholesale stores. And then finally, the third channel is to the large retailers. And if you think about their product, every time a new model comes out of an iPhone, a tablet, they have to typically accommodate that with some new products. So their SKU mix is changing dramatically, and getting those to their retailer partners is critical. From if a new iPhone launches, the huge missed opportunity if they don't get that product out. Now on the transportation side, just managing, thinking about high volume of those consumer orders versus the other extreme where you have the large big box retailers, less orders but large pallet freight orders that are coming in, and sometimes additional requirements in terms of things like advanced ship notices. And with their growth, they just, they were doing this all through one location out in California initially, and they, Bill talked about putting the inventory in the right spot, and with these channels and the SKU mix changing rapidly, that was certainly a trade-off that served them well to be able to fill all those different channels. But the challenge comes down to the different order profiles, and how do you do that cost effectively, support that growth without adding cost in the transportation, sort of associated cost in terms of operating that transportation. So in that case, they implemented a solution for shipping automation, both small package as well as freight, which also meets the large retailer requirements in terms of the EDI requirements and the compliance and the labeling requirements. And they're serving all of those channels out of that warehouse, and that growth is supported. And by automating those processes, they had dramatic improvements in their missed shipments. They increased their productivity of their team, and they also have much better inventory. So thinking that same product can be shipped out across each of those channels. So really a sort of as I said, a born in the omni-channel, grew up, and that they've really leveraged that the e-commerce channel, multiple channels on e-commerce to drive their success and their growth. The next customer I'd like to talk about is Lionel Racing. And we started working with them when it was primarily around the NASCAR diecast, selling primarily first on e-commerce channel out to consumers. And that was a very successful business, growing. Their peak season ran typically sort of in the sort of winter through summer as the NASCAR racing season. So a few years ago, they ended up merging and buying with Lionel Trains. They're a different business, but they consolidated that shipping and transportation distribution in their main warehouse down in North Carolina. But it doubled their volume, and it also introduced new sales channels, large retailers, the peak season as we're in now, a lot of holiday buying, and also some smaller wholesale sort of toy shops, those sort of customers. So similar to Incipio, being able to drive that and support that doubling of growth with the same team and the same systems, with the flexibility to support a single consumer shipment versus a multi-pallet freight shipment out to Target or Walmart, it was key to support their growth and their success. And then they've taken a couple of additional steps to that around integrating to marketplaces, so they additionally sell their product on Amazon, so as another sales channel. And then the last one, which I think is fairly unique and innovative, is they do sort of day of race replicas. So the race ends, you can pre-order that winner's car just exactly as it appears, with the scratches, and on their website, if you go look, you'll see with confetti. So you pre-order those. Those pre-orders come in. They get basically, it's a build to order built out of Asia, and then that comes in a container labeled ready to receive in their North Carolina facility. It comes in, and then with a day, it's cross-docked and shipped out via small package out to the consumers. So that, again, sort of another sales channel, sales opportunity to drive revenue, and then they also have that they ideally get that visibility to what's coming in. So if they have 1,000 of those units, and there's some additional ones to sell, they have, getting that visibility and be able to fulfill those orders creates a huge opportunity. Bill, I'm just going to hand it back to you now to continue on omnichannel fulfillment and integration.
Great, and I love that last example because it does point out some of the complexities, especially if you're manufacturing overseas, and then how do you get things in the types of time frame that customers expect. So one of the answers here we're looking at, we call it omni-mode integration. So starting with the concept of omni-channel fulfillment, of course, is that you've got all these different locations potentially that you can fulfill from, as well as different types of orders. The distributed order management, or DOM as it's commonly called, is a type of technology that helps you answer the question of where should I fulfill from. If I have multiple options in maybe multiple stores or in a retailer, then how can I optimize for certain things I'm trying to optimize, like it might be profit, it might be market share, it might be specific customers, etc. And this needs to take into account a lot of different data, such as where do I actually have inventory, where do I expect the demand in the future, how much does it cost to pick and pack. Labor availability is an important one too, because maybe you have the same item in two different stores, and one store is cheaper shipping costs and maybe even cheaper labor costs, but they're all booked up with other orders and not able to handle this in time to meet the deadline. So that could be an important factor as well. Now, when we talk about omni-mode integration, this is the concept that you can integrate across all the potential modes to find the best mode. The distributed order management is finding the best location. The omni-mode integration is finding the best mode for you to ship in. So this concept, I think, I like to explain it by starting out with a simple example involving only two modes, and then we'll expand to multiple modes. So in this case, the two modes would be, you've got your own private fleet, but you also use carriers. So this is not applying only to e-commerce. This could apply to full store loads and things like that as well, but it could also apply to e-commerce. So these typically are two different worlds, right? You're the person managing private fleet cares about utilizing assets, scheduling drivers, and staying compliant with laws. The person managing carriers, they figure the carrier is going to take care of all of that, so they're just selecting the carrier, tendering loads and contracting and managing, make sure the carriers are performing to spec. And they each have their own systems, and sort of never the twain shall meet, so to speak. The fleet managers using route planning and dispatching systems, and the for-hire person is using the TMS system. And there's some, usually this would be typical, some very simple static rule, like if the destination is within 75 miles of the DC, we'll use our own fleet. If it's outside that circle, then we'll use a common carrier. Now, the problem with this is you can end up making some suboptimal decisions. So the example I'm giving here, you've got your DC in the center with your 75-mile radius and 3 stops. Of course, in the real world, you'd have a lot more stops than this, but this is to help make the point. Stops 2 and 3 are just inside and just outside the circle. And your simplistic rule will say, I'm going to send my own truck to stop 1 and 2, even though they're a long way apart, and use common carrier for stop 3. And so, of course, common sense would tell you, hey, we should send the same truck to stop 2 and 3, even if it breaks the rule a little bit, if you will. So these are the kinds of decisions that if you do the more omni-mode integration, that you can have a more dynamic decision-making process. Now, in order to do this, if we take a look at our diagram we were just looking at, so we add this new component that sits between the systems that are used to plan both carrier and your own fleet. And this omni-mode integration technology will send queries into the other systems to understand what are the current route plans, what are the costs, what are the constraints, and all those kinds of things. And then it can make much smarter decisions than your simple static rules. So that's key to squeezing cost out of the equation and doing a smarter job of transportation. The same concept can now be extended beyond just your route planning, integrating route planning and TMS to parcel execution. Now, ideally, you'd like your parcel system to be part of your TMS system, but even if it's not, you can start to extend it out here and integrate those decisions as well. And this is, of course, where e-commerce starts to become relevant here, is because the simple rule for e-commerce is all e-commerce orders go via parcel, period. And the problem is that leaves on the table opportunities for cost savings. So one of those could be zone skipping. Many of you may be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, let's say that I have my DC on the East Coast and another one on the West Coast, and so I send truckloads from the East Coast to the West Coast potentially, or for whatever reason I'm sending truckloads to across the coast. If I have parcels, e-commerce orders that are fulfilled out of the East Coast DC are going to the West Coast, I can put them on those trucks as long as they're going to get there on time. That's one of the constraints you have to consider. But if they'll get there on time, put it on the truckloads or that are going there anywhere, and skip zones over there and get a much lower parcel cost and a much lower total cost of delivery. Another mode that you really should take a look at is pool distribution. So I might not even have a DC on the West Coast because I don't have enough customers in that market. And in that case, I'm sending trucks out there to do milk run type of stops or LTL or different things like that. With pool distribution, there is a pool operator in that market, and there are hundreds of these around the country in each of the major markets. And what they will do is they will consolidate demand from not just you, but from other shippers. And so now they can create the full truckloads that go to the retailers or other endpoints, and thereby doing things at a lower cost and actually more efficiently and more quickly. And you can use this for e-commerce as well. They'll actually, you could send it to the pool point, and they can send out the parcel delivery or other ways of delivering it. The last thing I put on this diagram is the inbound-outbound integration. So what you have here is again, normally you've got very rigid rules about what goes in your inbound and outbound trucks. But if you have one of your trucks from your DC that's going to the delivery, it's usually coming back empty. If there was an inbound load nearby, then wouldn't it be great if that truck could bring that load in? It would save time and money for everybody. So that kind of integration is pretty sophisticated, and not everyone does it. But you put all this together, and the story or the point here is that with omni-mode integration, you're considering all the different options for mode selection and doing it dynamically, and thereby getting lower costs. And as a result of this, this diagram is intended to show that the old static mode, simplistic rules, a fixed set of rules, really constrains your opportunities to lower cost, to get greater service. And I think just as important is sometimes it's actually not feasible to execute against those rules, whereas a dynamic mode can find more consistently feasible and executable types of arrangements. So with that, I'll pass it back to Brian to give some relevant examples.
Excellent.
Here.
Thank you very much, Bill. So this is a customer we were working with that leveraged Descartes for the fleet on their outbound for customer deliveries. And then as we were talking to them and looking at opportunities to expand the footprint and improve their process, what we've discovered is their inbound. They're really leaving all of their inbound to their vendors and suppliers to manage. But they did some analysis and looking at the costs, they identified really a great opportunity to take better control of those inbound. They had about 30,000 shipments inbound, of which they were really not managing many. But through analysis and leveraging some of their carriers, what they ended up doing is converting 2/3 of that, actually a little more than 2/3 of that. 2/3 of it they ended up converting to common carrier freight, where they're controlling the carriers and the freight costs. And then an additional 6-7% they converted with their own fleet and leveraged their fleet much more effectively for backhauls. And as a result, they ended up saving over $6 million and also getting much better visibility across their different branches to their spend and their carrier relationships and opportunity to really consolidate and drive better customer service as well. And then as we learned from that and talked to other distributors, another food distributor that was similarly using the fleet, as we were talking about them about inbound, they also discussed how they were doing more B2B e-commerce. They were just starting on this initiative to take more orders electronically from their customers. And there's a couple things that they found with that. And as Bill mentioned, originally they had very static rules. They had their inbound transportation was managed by their vendors. Their fleet was delivered large, and then small packages based on weight were shipped out via parcel. But once they opened up their e-commerce, what they found was there were really two factors that impacted the dynamics. One was they were getting more orders that are outside of their delivery zone, and they had to sort of assess how to service those customers profitably. And then the other one was their existing customers were doing more frequent orders and smaller orders. So that dynamic sort of provided a bit of a challenge for their traditional sort of fleet bound. So being able to sort of optimize and streamline those orders more dynamically based on maybe 2 or 3 e-commerce orders come in, and then in that case they should be delivered to that same customer by fleet, as opposed to individually you might think they'd be delivered small package. So being able to optimize across those and then also incorporate some of the inbound with that fleet became huge cost saver for them, and also enabled their growth, really a key growth area through e-commerce, and being able to serve customers that they didn't have before, and then serve their existing customers in a way that those customers found more convenient with e-commerce and their order profile changing. Bill, back to you.
Great. Those are some great examples of how it happens in real life. So I'm going to shift gears here to talk about always-on optimization, sometimes called continuous optimization, and contrast that with the traditional approach to route planning and optimization. Along the middle of the graph here, you see on the right-hand side is the day of delivery for a set of shipments, and then we've got the days leading up to that, day -1, day -2, etc. During this period, you've got the stream of incoming orders, and then what happens is usually on the afternoon or evening of the day before your delivery day, you've got this hard cutoff where after which you can't take any more orders for the next day, because now you need to run your batch mode route optimization, which runs for several hours, and you'd like to run it longer, but you only have a certain amount of time, so you get the best answer you can in those, so that you can get your answer in time to start putting together all your shipments. Now, what happens is any order that's after that, misses the boat, so to speak. But you're still going to have on the day of the shipment some people canceling things, maybe somebody that says, I don't care, I've got to have it today no matter what. And that kind of generally wreaks havoc with what you're doing. Now, in contrast with Always On, you've got the same stream of incoming orders that you have above. But what you're doing is in the background, as each order comes in, you're creating routes, and you're continually optimizing those routes and re-optimizing for each order as they come in. And what happens as a result is now you can push your cutoff to much later, maybe later that evening, possibly even into the next morning, because adding one more order is not that big of a job for your optimization engine. You've pretty much got it mostly figured out. So it has the advantage of a later cutoff, and it's also a softer cutoff. And by that I mean the optimization engine can continue to run even after your cutoff time. If you get these exceptions, cancellation, rush orders, it can, to the extent that's physically possible. Obviously, there's physical constraints. It can accommodate some of those orders. And so what this means, there are a couple things. One I already mentioned was that your continuous optimization is running for a much longer period of time, so it's actually going to do a better job of optimizing. The batch mode is trying to cram all that optimization into this very short period of compute time. But the other thing is, with the traditional approach, you actually don't know what your routes are until that optimization finishes. And as a result, everything you're giving is just an estimate or guesstimate, and it's hard for planners to see until after that, hey, some of the things that we're planning are actually not feasible or possible to do. With the continuous optimization, the team gets to see where those potential issues are ahead of time and has time to work on them and actually fix things and make things work well. Now, one more thing with this is, I think this is one of the coolest parts of Always On optimization or continuous optimization, is your ability to now shape demand and point customers and incent them to do, quote unquote, the right thing, right? So in this case, we're looking at, you've got the stream of incoming orders for the last few days. You're now in delivery day -2, and in comes your next order. So before you even present to the customer what their options are, you can figure out, you already know what routes you've got planned, when the truck's going to be near their location anyway. And so you can show them those slots or else make those slots lower cost. Or as John Lewis does, it marks those slots as eco-friendly. So it's not even giving up any revenue to incent them. It's just saying, hey, if you pick this slot, it's better for the environment. And they found that actually was quite effective, at least in the UK, in incentivizing people to pick the slots that fit the best with the existing plan. So that demand shaping gives you this another layer of benefit that's only possible when you're doing this continuous, always-on optimization. And so, Brian, I guess you can talk a little bit about some of the things John Lewis is doing.
Yeah, John Lewis is a customer of Descartes, a UK retailer, about 10 billion in pounds sterling. And a few years ago, they launched a very aggressive omnichannel program, and what they wanted to do is provide obviously growth, but for their customers, consumers, they wanted to provide as many options as possible, from coming into the store, ordering online, mobile ordering. And through that program, they really got a lot of recognition and awards in terms of best channel and retailer, multi-channel, online, and recognition. And it was driving a lot of activity. But what they realized as they got into it was, although they were providing a lot of choices to the consumers at the front end, the delivery options were too limited. And they really wanted to be able to, for the whole end-to-end customer experience, provide those same level of choices. So in addition to at order entry, they couldn't provide, for example, a specific time if you were getting a home delivery of some furniture or a television, those sort of things. And then the other challenge they had was coordinating that with other services. So if there's installation or setup services, white glove services that are required with that delivery, it was very hard to coordinate that. So those things were driving up their costs and impacting their customer satisfaction. So what they end up doing is integrating appointment schedulers. So up right at the point of entry of order entry, they allow the customer to select their delivery, and that allows them, greatly increases the customer satisfaction, but it allows them to lock in that order more firmly and then plan both the transportation and any specific services that might be required with it. And then as the home delivery gets executed, implementing that with optimized routing, continuous optimization, and visibility to those deliveries. So if there is some delay or traffic, they can be very proactive with the customer, and then through optimization, really driving a lot of efficiency. So this ended up supporting, significant growth, over 10 million British pounds. And while doing that, they improved their capacity as well as cut the miles in terms of their delivery. So while increasing revenues and profits, they also operationally improved and cut their costs in terms of the transportation and their fleet delivery.
Yeah,
so Bill, I think you were going to step through some automation examples.
Sure, exactly. I love that example. It points out one of the things was a lot of things can happen on the day of delivery besides the cancellations and rush orders, and traffic being one of them. And we know that stuff happens, right? So having that continuous optimization really gives you that additional flexibility. So the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is fulfillment automation. So this is maybe not strictly speaking transportation, but it is in the warehouse where you're fulfilling. It's part of your fulfillment costs, and it involves the handoff, if you will, to the transportation. And so I think when some people think about automation in the warehouse or a WMS system, they think about it as an all or none proposition. And I want to change your thinking about that a little. As you can see, you've got this kind of progression, and there are tools out there. At least one I'm aware of is the Oslink tool that Descartes also has that lets you take these in bite-sized pieces. So you could start with just shipping label printing, for example, and then integrate to your ERP, and then add some barcode scanning to verify your receiving, put away, and picking. And now you've done some simple steps that really can greatly increase not just your efficiency, but also lower your error rates, right? When you're scanning, say, for your pick, pack, ship, you make sure you pick the right one, you pack the right one, and so forth. That's got tremendous benefit, and it's not that hard to implement. You haven't implemented a WMS system yet, but you've done some of these automation steps. Now you could add some inventory control, maybe a retailer-specific labeling, because that's where manufacturers certainly get dinged because they put the wrong label on or did something wrong or they didn't generate the ASN on time. And so these steps that you can take, it doesn't have to be the Big Bang Theory. It can be just incremental steps. What's your biggest pain point? Let's address that, and let's start increasing your automation and throughput in incremental steps. And I think Brian's going to give you an example.
Yeah, so Finis is a manufacturer of swim, flippers and masks, snorkels, those sort of things. They have distribution both in the U.S. and Europe, and they provide their goods to, as you might expect, sort of large retail. They do online as well as large retail stores, Dick's, REI, outdoor goods retailers. And the challenge they had is as that growth, their growth through those large retailers was really driving a lot of the activity, but they hadn't really taken some of those steps. First starting out with basic automating the shipping. Then next is streamlining and automating some of the warehouse processes, and being able to do that for the retailers that have specific requirements around labeling, around capturing things for the advanced ship knows what's going in each box, the tracking number, those sort of things. So being able to automate those in stages allowed them, they're a huge company, but provided significant, over 120,000 in savings in dealing with those large retailers, and being able to not just improve the operational performance of their teams, but also improve the relationship with their retailers, cut back on chargebacks, deliver the right product to the right DC of those large retailers in a much more efficient fashion. And similar to sort of this phased approach and what Bill talked about, looking at sort of TMS in general, I guess a similar type of approach you can take that, focusing on outbound, focusing on e-commerce parcel, but knowing that there's going to be a broader sort of optimization opportunity, but focusing on, hey, where's the most painful area first? And often, with the growth of e-commerce, it is how do you factor in sort of parcel into the rest of the sort of transportation processes? Bill, I think you're going to just wrap it up here.
Yeah. So this, in conclusion, as they say, a few points here. I think one that we didn't really emphasize so much is the importance of a network platform, especially as you get into e-commerce and the sort of omnichannel multi-mode. You've got all these different choices and all these different players, different carriers and pool distributors, and if you're going international, potentially brokers and custom agents, insurance companies, etc. There are network platforms out there that actually pre-connect all of these folks and make it much easier to get the job done. I would say that automating your fulfillment and shipping is maybe one of the first things that you should look at if you're not already doing that, and that can be done in these small incremental steps. Getting parcel in there, and ideally you should have a parcel that's integrated into your TMS system and not as a separate approach. The omni-mode integration, that's a journey, right? It's not something like in a single step. But the idea here is as we talked about, really taking all of these modes and doing a smarter and more dynamic job of deciding what's the right mode to use. And you got to squeeze every penny out of your operations you can in order to stay competitive, and this is one of the ways. Continuous optimization can be a little bit more of an advanced thing, but I think it's a great thing to do, especially if you have your own private fleet. International, this could be anywhere on the list. It could be something, I know there's some very small companies that do this, but you really need to make sure you got the tools in place to do it properly. Otherwise, you can really fall on your face when you try to do that. By organizational integration, I mean, as was mentioned earlier, a lot of people start out with e-commerce as this separate side project that there just has its own inventory, its own staff, its own systems, its own everything. And that can become suboptimal. It certainly doesn't help with omni-mode integration. It also doesn't help if you've got that same staff in a mixed mode DC. A lot of people will have basically a firewall between those two inventories. They're not allowed to touch each other's inventory. But a more advanced approach is have like a virtual pool of inventory. So if you've got excess on one side and a shortage on the other side, you can still use that inventory between your e-commerce side and the other side. And the last thing I'd say here, this is kind of an extension of my point about automating fulfillment and shipment processes, is that you don't have to do this as a gigantic project. And in fact, I would look for continuous improvements and opportunities across these dimensions to just keep chipping away at it again and again and trying different things, and take more of an agile approach to incremental implementation. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One is you'll never catch up otherwise, and everything is moving fast. And so each month and each year, there's something new comes along. So it's really important to take a more agile approach to getting things done. And with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Wonderful give and take, gentlemen, and terrific case studies illustrating the very issues that we're exploring here, or as Bill called them, examples of how it happens in real life. Well, gentlemen, thank you. But now we got to get to some of the questions. Speaking of case studies, it looks like one of the audience members is interested in even more examples. Brian, here's one for you. The question says, you mentioned the explosion of delivery modes. Can you share any customer examples where they're doing some cutting-edge models? Well, what would you say?
Yeah, so Bill talked about some sort of the lockers and Uber. I was speaking to one of our customers, a large retailer, and right now for their e-commerce, we were really discussing sort of the trends and how they're trying to address things. They have a fair number of stores nationally. But they do all of their e-commerce through a central DC. So their first step was to how can they leverage that better in inventory and get closer to the customer. And then follow on to that, and this leads to sort of more cutting edge, I'd say, is I'd asked them about home delivery. And I didn't get the answer that I expected. They said, well, in certain metropolitan areas, our store density is such that we believe it's convenient for the person to go to the store, and so we're looking more at pickup. Customer pick, order online and pick it up. And as I thought about that, and then as I sort of went through my daily life, I was standing in line at Starbucks for 10 minutes, hurrying to get into work, and then someone comes in, passes the whole line, and picks up their order and leaves. And so that customer pickup, thinking about what's convenient, and especially in sort of certain commodities like food, same-day delivery might be good enough, but actually, hey, if I'm already rushing around and I can just put my order in online and pick it up, that's also a very convenient factor in terms of my time perspective. And today's Wall Street Journal actually has a whole article on Amazon's starting to open up retail stores, which is sort of counterintuitive to sort of the e-commerce paradigm, but their sort of unique secret sauce is going to be able to that curbside. So you order online and you just go pick it up. So that sort of efficient, convenient factor for people who maybe already out running around and they need to get it on their journey. And I don't think that's limited. And the article does talk about other large retailers, Target and others experimenting with curbside. So I think that certainly was something that I've seen more in the last few months. And then specifically, there's for my daughter's soccer, it's like order online and go pick it up at the store. The store actually doesn't even have the inventory to go. You can have some samples, you can look at things, but you can't go and buy there. So it's a different model, very sort of a very small business model, but it's using that sort of order online, pick up local type model. So it's not. I don't think it's limited to the large retailers and the large players.
Go to a showroom.
I can add just
see what they've got. Yeah. Bill, I've got one for you. You talked about fulfillment quite a bit. This particular questioner wants to know a little something about streamlining fulfillment. Question is, what do you see are the training and process differences required to streamline fulfillment in the warehouse versus at a store? What would you tell them?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that in a store you've got customers, like right? But what that means is for the fulfillment process is interruptions. So you've got your pick, pack, ship in a warehouse. You can count on the workers going through the task from end to end with few or no interruptions. Whereas in the store, especially if you're picking from the front of the store, this would be different for back store picking. But if you're picking from the front of the store, there are going to be interruptions, and your systems and your training and your process needed to be set up so that associate can stop what they're doing in their pick process, help the customer, and then get back to it without having to say, now where was I? What was I doing? And all of that. So I'd say that's the biggest difference. There's another thing I would mention, which is not a difference. It's actually a similarity, but it's sometimes overlooked, is that in the warehouse, there's a lot of attention paid to the proper packing of goods for shipment, and there's a fair amount of training on that so that customers are satisfied when the goods are come that they were packed properly. That same kind of training needs to be given to store associates. They're not going to automatically know the right way to pack items and do it in a way that's going to be satisfactory. So I guess those are the couple things that come to mind.
I mean, and Bill, I'd add also to that is, typically similarly in a warehouse, very specialized. You may be just picking, just packing, and that's what the people are doing. Whereas the variety of sort of tasks that the associate might do in the store and the temporary staffing, I think can be a little more challenging in the store to get that sort of efficiency accuracy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this element of task integration that is in the store that's not there in the warehouse.
Gentlemen, I want to go to a question that starts out by thanking you. How you like that? It says, thank you very much for the webinar. And then they go on to say, I read more and more about networked platforms, but I failed to formulate one clear definition. Would you be able to present your view on that? We'll help that questioner out. What would you say?
Yeah, and I can start. Transportation by its very nature is multi-party. So by a networked solution that includes, getting visibility and coordinating with all the parties. So that might be sharing a purchase order electronically with a supplier, getting an advanced ship notice. We saw a number of the case studies today providing an ASN or advanced ship notice to their customer, giving better visibility to this shipment is on its way and here's the goods in it. Here's the tracking number. Similarly, integrating with carriers, so streamlining that process in terms of, the load has been picked up, the track and trace, those sort of opportunities. So it's really connecting in all the people involved with the transportation, the vendor, the carrier, and customer.
And I just might add, this is an area that we at Chainlink have covered quite a bit. There is an architecture aspect to this for the solutions that support that. So you've probably heard of software as a service model or multi-tenant single instance you might have heard of. Those are things like NetSuite and other ERP providers that provide a single instance of code that's shared across all their customers. The network platform actually has not just that, but they add this ability to be a many-to-many data model so that the data is also shared across the entire network. Now, obviously, there are lots of security controls put in place and everything, but the reason that's important is because that gives you the ability to have the single version of the truth across your end-to-end network of carriers and shippers and consignees and other people, and everyone sees the same thing. They see that this order was placed, they see what the status is, they see proof of delivery, whatever it is, all with the same shared database. So that's one of the key technical differences of what is really a true networked platform.
Let me just say that we've got question after question rolling in here. We're simply not going to be able to get to all of them during the webcast, but I want to back up and ask, because it's a basic question, and maybe questioner says, are multi-channel and omni-channel the same? So walk us through that. Let's drill down and talk about what differences there may be.
Yeah, and again, I can start. I think multi-channel is so typically an older term, and I think it's as e-commerce sort of evolved and grew, a company might be multi-channel, but typically it was also, multi-department, multi-system, multi-warehouse internally. They might, as Bill has highlighted, might set up as a separate stovepipe, whereas omni-channel, you're really trying to leverage the efficiencies of whether that's inventory, whether it's, warehouses close to the customer, transportation costs, is really providing, leveraging the costly sort of, operational costs and to serve multiple different customers in multiple different ways, the most cost effectively and the best service level as possible.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I know that people have debates about terminology, and but I think Brian's point is a good one. You may have multiple channels, but they're not integrated well. So I think that's a lot of what our discussion was about today.
All right, gentlemen, I'm afraid that we're going to have to leave it there. As I say, there's quite a number of questions that have come in. Folks, the experts will get to your questions. They will answer them offline. but right now is simply all the time that we have. I'd like to thank Brian Hodgson of Descartes and Bill Macbeth of Chainlink Research for their time and for their valuable information today. And of course, I want to thank you for attending. Well, this concludes our presentation. Till next time, Russell Goodman, Supply Chain Brain. So long.